Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. A lot of discussion over the last couple of weeks talking about some of the best defenses that we'll see in college football heading into the 2024 season. Want to give you guys my top 5 defenses in college football heading into 2024. Extremely excited to get into this one. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys, and it truly has been a blast taking deep dives into all of these programs during the last couple of weeks. The amount of support you guys have shown the boys truly does mean a lot. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, but much more importantly, would love to get some of your feedback in the comment section, whether you agree with me, whether you disagree with me. Would love to hear some of your input. We'll chop it up down there, and without further ado, let's get into this one. And I want to start with my number one defense heading into 2024, and largely one of the best defenses we saw in the country in 2023 as well. That's Ohio State. Couple things that I want to start with Ohio State. One, the amount of NFL talent on this defensive side of the football for Ohio State is absolutely incredible. I mean, they have multiple guys, Jack Sawyer, JTT, Denzel Burke, guys that could have gone to the NFL, been top 150 picks, decide to come back in 2024. But what's even more important is the depth on this defense is extremely impressive. And you're going year 3 into the Jim Knowles defense, which I think is massive. You saw Ohio State take massive strides in that 2023 year. You could tell the players were just a little bit more comfortable with that Jim Knowles defense that is complicated. We saw some growing pains in 2022. Really high on not only the talent, but the scheme and going into year 3 of that Jim Knowles scheme. And you kind of look at how this Ohio State defense is constructed. One of the first things that I look for in elite defenses is what does that defensive line look like? Two of the most important aspects of playing defense at the college football level. One, stopping the run and getting after the passer. And that starts up front. And you have, two guys that very well could be playing in the NFL in JTT and Jack Sawyer on the edge. But what sets Ohio State apart for me is you are very deep at that edge rusher position as well. Kenyatta Jackson Jr., a guy that probably starts on most Power 5 programs, kind of being a rotational aspect. Guys like Caden Curry, you get Edric Houston as a true freshman. I think this pass rush for Ohio State is extremely impressive, not only with those top guys, but the depth of that pass rush as well. And you look at, some of the best defenses that we've seen in college football over the last couple of years. Yes, they've had NFL talent on the defensive line. They've also been extremely deep, right? You think about Michigan in 2023, multiple guys that are playing in the NFL or will play in the NFL, kind of in that 2 deep. The Georgia Bulldogs, obviously extremely deep on the defensive line the last couple of years too. That's probably what stands out to me the most. But you combine that elite pass rush, a pass rush that I truly think will be one of the better units in the country, with an elite back end of this defense as well. Denzel Burke, NFL caliber cornerback. Davison Igbinosun, the transfer from Ole Miss last year, thought he played extremely good, but not only did he play good as a second-year guy, he's got a lot of meat left on the bone in terms of being an elite cornerback at the next level. You bring in Caleb Downs, one of the best freshmen in the country. Jermaine Matthews, he's not even going to start for Ohio State probably. You're talking about another very good cornerback at the college football level. The secondary is loaded with NFL talent as well. You kick Sonny Styles into that linebacker spot. You start looking at the boxes that you want to see checked. Elite pass rush, linebackers that can play at the college football level, operate in space at a high level, and then in the back end, extremely loaded in the secondary. I think it comes down to Ohio State. You don't have many questions about this defense. Again, going into year 3 with this Jim Knowles defense, it is hard to take a defense over Ohio State heading into 2024. Next defense I want to talk about, sticking in the Big Ten, my Michigan Wolverines. And you could go either way. Ohio State, Michigan, Georgia's going to be my number 3 defense. And you could argue that any of those 3 defenses will be the number 1 defense in the country. And I probably wouldn't push back very much. Now, why I went with Ohio State over Michigan was you still have some questions about Michigan's defense heading into 2024 that you don't really have for Ohio State, right? Who's going to be that cornerback too? Who's going to replace Rod Moore, who just went down with an injury? Mikey Sandstrom going to the NFL draft. Yeah, this Michigan defense is going to be a top 5 defense in the country, but the reason I'm kind of differentiating Ohio State and Michigan as of right now is you still have some questions about replacing some NFL talent for Michigan that you don't really have for Ohio State. Now, the things that I love about Michigan is I think you have the best interior defensive line in the country with Mason Graham and Kenneth Graham. Mason Graham, a guy that I think will be a top 15 NFL draft pick in that 2025 NFL draft. And when you have the ability to be disruptive on the inside, that is truly, you kind of look at the Georgia defenses the last couple of years with guys like Jalen Carter or Jordan Davis. That's what made Georgia really special up front. I think Michigan is special on the inside of that defensive line, not only in terms of stopping the run, but both Kenneth Graham and Mason Graham, some of the best pass rushers from the inside as well. You're bringing Derek Moore and Josiah Stewart on the outside, 2 top 10 edge rushers in the country as well. This Michigan defense is going to be extremely, extremely disruptive. They're going to force turnovers. They're going to create negative plays. One of the best defenses in the country very well could be the best defense in the country if we get some answers in the back end of that defense. Number 3 on my defense is the Georgia Bulldogs. Now, the reason I have Georgia at number 3, this is a defense that 100% could be the best defense we see in the country from a talent standpoint. The big question that I have and kind of why I have Ohio State and Michigan ahead of Georgia heading into the 2024 season is Georgia's pass rush. I got to see a little bit more. You look at the Georgia teams in 2021 and in 2022, they had game records up front, right? Guys like Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Nolan Smith. You look back at the film for Georgia in 2023, that elite pass rusher, that game record really wasn't there for Georgia, and you saw that hurt them at certain points in that 2024 season. Now, do they have guys that I think could certainly emerge as elite disruptors on that defensive line? 100% they do. You got to see that happen in 2024. And if that happens and you get guys like Jordan Hall or a guy like Damon Wilson or a guy like Jalen Walker to really step up, this is a defense that certainly could be the best defense in the country. Now, looking at kind of what I want to see from Georgia heading into 2024, whether it is Mikael Williams, whether it's Jordan Hall from the inside, whether it's Christian Miller, who we saw play some really good football at the end of 2023, Damon Wilson Jr., these are guys that have elite pass rush traits. You got to see that manifest itself in 2024. Now, do I trust Kirby Smart to get this defensive line ready heading into 2024? I absolutely do. And if this defensive line can kind of emerge as a dominant unit like we saw in 2021 and in 2022, you're looking at potentially the best defense in the country, because you look at the back end, there's not a better linebacker room in the country than the Georgia Bulldogs. Munden, C.J. Allen, Raylan Wilson, I expect to play really good ball. You got 3 true freshmen who are going to be elite at that linebacker spot. Then you look at the back end, guys like Malachi Starks, guys like Everett Julian Humphrey. It's a loaded secondary. It's a loaded linebacker room. If Georgia can be game wreckers up front, this is going to be a defense that you see emerge as one of the best defenses in the country. And again, we've all learned as college football fans, you don't bet against Kirby Smart and the development that he has shown on that defensive line. Now, getting into the defenses 4 and 5, this is where there are a lot of different teams that you could talk about. Penn State's one that I want to touch on real quick. Now, I did not include them in my top 5, but I do want to talk about them really quick. And that is, this Penn State defense last year was arguably the best defense that we saw in the country. They were very reliant on their edge rushers being extremely disruptive. You lose guys like Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac to the NFL draft. My question for Penn State is, do they have those edge rushers who sacked the quarterback 12.4% of the time last year? That was number 1 in the country. That was largely how this Penn State defense was so dominant. Negative plays, sacks, game-changing plays. Can Danny Dennis Sutton and company kind of provide that same level of juice on that defensive line for Penn State? That's the question mark you have. You also have to replace Manny Diaz as your defensive coordinator. I mean, Abdul Carter, one of, if not the best linebacker that you see in the country. They get him involved in a lot of different ways. You add A.J. Harris at that cornerback spot through coming from Auburn. This Penn State defense, certainly one of the best units in the country, but I didn't include them in my top 5 because I do think that replacing guys like Chop and Adissa is going to be tough for Penn State heading into 2024. I want to get into my number 4 defense in the country, and that is the Clemson Tigers, a defense that I think has just been significantly overlooked the last couple of years because, one, it's been some disappointing seasons for Clemson, but more importantly, a lot of their problems have been on the offensive side of the football. You dive into the Clemson film on defense, this is still one of the best defenses that you see in the country. And why I'm so high on Clemson heading into 2024 is I think that front 7 can be absolutely dominant. Again, the 2 things that I look for really heading into a season is, can you stop the run and can you get after the passer? I think Clemson certainly will be able to do that. You look at this Clemson defensive line, the thing that is really interesting for me is, TJ Parker was dominant as a true freshman. Peter Woods was dominant as a true freshman. They're going to kick Peter Woods out to that edge rusher spot, and you're talking about TJ Parker, Peter Woods rushing off the edge. That could be a duo that might be the best pass rushing duo that you see in the country, right? These guys were phenomenal as freshmen. If they take that step, you're looking at 2 All-Americans as edge rushers. You look on the inside, guys like Capehart, Trey Williams, Peyton Page, Vic Burley getting healthy. I think the inside of that defensive line is going to be extremely disruptive as well. You look at the linebackers, Barrett Carter, one of the best linebackers in the country. You have a guy like Wade Woodess, who I think I am extremely excited for in 2024. And then you inject true freshman Sammy Brown. I think this front 7 has the bones to be one of the better front 7s that you see in the country. And that's where it starts. You look at the back end on paper, you lose guys like Nate Wiggins, you lose guys like Andrew Makuba. These young secondary guys for Clemson were absolutely phenomenal the back half of that 2023 season. You start diving into the film, these guys were extremely impressive. You kind of look at how this depth chart shakes out. Jaden Lucas, a guy going into year 3, all the traits of being an elite cornerback. Khalil Barnes was phenomenal for Clemson. Terrell, I am extremely excited about the young guys in that secondary. I think the big question you have is, all right, RJ Mickens at safety, who's going to be your other safety? If Clemson answers those questions, you're looking at not only a really good secondary that is young, but guys in the front 7 that really can be game wreckers for this Clemson Tigers defense. I think they're going to be a top 5 defense in the country. Now, the last defense that I want to talk about, this is, kind of me putting my kind of flag in the ground in terms of a defense that I think really breaks out in 2024. That is the Texas A&M Aggies. And many of you guys know, again, we've kind of talked about what do I look for in elite defenses. I want to see a front 7 that can be dominant. And I think this Texas A&M front 7 really can break out going into next year. You kind of look at how this shakes out. You bring in Nick Skirden, who probably was the best edge rusher in the Big Ten last year at Purdue, a guy that had 28 quarterback hurries, a 21% pass rush win rate. You combine that with guys like Shamar Stewart, Shamar Turner, 2 guys that played some really good football for Texas A&M. And then you have some young guys like DJ Hicks and Gabriel Brown-Ladindi, who you saw kind of emerge towards that 2020 end of the 2023 season. That defensive line has the ability to really be game wreckers up front. You return true freshman All-American Torian York at that linebacker spot. And the big question for Texas A&M is probably that secondary. And I think why I'm optimistic about the secondary is, one, Mike Elko, elite at developing defensive backs. But more importantly, they did a phenomenal job in the transfer portal. They brought in so many guys, and I think it turns into a little bit of a numbers game. You bring in that much talent into the secondary, guys are going to shake out and I think kind of emerge, whether it's Will Lee, whether it is guys like BJ Mays, Des Ricks, DeRicky White, Marcus Ratcliffe. There's too many names in the back end of that Texas A&M defense that I like to be too concerned with what that secondary looks like. So you start taking a checkbox to this Texas A&M defense, elite front 7, very good linebacker play in Torian York. I'm kind of interested to see who emerges as that second linebacker. And then 8-9 guys in that defensive back room who I think can be very good for Texas A&M. Whoever emerges, you kind of feel good will be elite in the back end. Texas A&M, a defense that I certainly have my eyes on heading into 2024. Another team that I want to give a quick shout out to, Notre Dame. Return a lot of talent, have a lot of young talent on that defense. Another defense that you could really see emerge as a top 5 unit in the country. Now, those are my top 5. Left a lot of teams out that I wanted to fit in. I think the way I look at it, on paper heading into 2024, Ohio State, Michigan, Georgia, those are my clear top 3s. And then the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, there's a lot of good defenses that kind of could emerge as top 5 units in the country. Those are my top 5. Again, would love to hear some of your top 5 in the comments section. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.